My sons made me proud. My daughter, well, not everyone can be a winner. The words hit the banquet hall like a cold wind, followed by scattered awkward laughter. I stood at the back of the room in Portland, Oregon, watching my father, Harold Bennett, deliver his retirement speech to a crowd of colleagues, family, and friends. My grip tightened on the small, wrapped box in my hands as I forced my face to remain neutral. "I owe everything to my boys," he continued, his voice swelling with pride as he gestured toward my brothers. Thomas, with his law firm, and James, expanding the family construction business. They understand what it means to build something lasting. More applause, more smiles, more validation for the golden sons while I remained invisible at the back of the room. My name is Naomi Bennett. I'm 39 years old, and tonight was supposed to be about celebrating my father's 40-year career as a structural engineer. Instead, it became another reminder of why I'd spent most of my adult life proving myself to a man who would never see me. The banquet hall buzzed with the comfortable chatter of people who'd known each other for decades. My father's colleagues from North Peak Engineering filled the tables, their wives dressed in their finest, everyone eager to honor Harold Bennett's distinguished career. Everyone except me seemed genuinely happy to be there. I watched Thomas lean back in his chair, basking in the praise. At 42, my oldest brother had built a successful law practice and married well. James, 38, had taken Dad's initial skepticism about his intelligence and turned it into determination, growing our family's small construction company into a regional powerhouse. Both had given Dad the grandchildren he bragged about, the sons-in-law he respected, the legacy he could point to with pride. And then there was me. Naomi's always been different, Dad had told people over the years, usually with that particular tone that made different sound like a diagnosis. She's got her head in the clouds with all those science projects. Never could get her to focus on practical things. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who built bridges for a living had never learned to build one to his daughter. As Dad wrapped up his speech, thanking everyone for their years of friendship and collaboration, I made my decision. I walked toward the front of the room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Conversations quieted as people noticed my movement. "Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. He looked surprised to see me approaching the podium. I placed the wrapped box on the table beside him. "From your biggest failure." The room went dead quiet. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, could sense the confusion and discomfort rippling through the crowd. My father stared at the box, then at me, his mouth slightly open. I turned and walked out, leaving behind 40 years of disappointment and a lifetime of being underestimated. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Through the windows of the banquet hall, I could see the party continuing, though the energy seemed different now. People were probably wondering what had just happened, what was in that box, why Harold Bennett's daughter had made such a scene. The truth was, tonight had been building for decades. Growing up in the Bennett household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Dad was the undisputed king, the brilliant engineer who designed structures that would outlast us all. Mom was his devoted queen, managing the household and supporting his career with unwavering loyalty. Thomas and James were the princes, groomed from childhood to carry on the family tradition of building things that mattered. And I was the spare. I remembered being 8 years old, bringing Dad a drawing I'd made of a robot that could help sick people. He'd glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before handing it back. "That's nice, sweetheart. Why don't you go help your mother in the kitchen?" When I was 12, I'd won the regional science fair with a project on biomedical engineering. Dad had missed the ceremony because James had a baseball game. "Sports build character," he'd explained later. "Science projects are just hobbies." The pattern continued through high school. While my brothers were encouraged to take advanced math and engineering courses, I was steered toward more suitable subjects, When I insisted on pursuing pre-med in college, Dad had sighed and said, "Well, nursing is a respectable career for a woman." "I want to be a doctor, not a nurse," I'd replied. "Let's see how long that lasts," he'd said with a dismissive wave. It lasted through medical school, through my residency, through my fellowship in biomedical engineering. It lasted through the countless nights I spent in labs and libraries while my brothers were getting married and having children. It lasted through every family gathering where Dad introduced Thomas as my lawyer son and James as the one taking over the business, while describing me as still figuring things out. Even when I started my own company 5 years ago, developing medical devices that were revolutionizing patient care, Dad remained unimpressed. "It's a nice little side business," he'd told relatives, "though I worry she's not focused enough on finding a husband." The little side business now employed 200 people and had just closed a $50 million funding round. My latest invention, a non-invasive monitoring device for cardiac patients, was being used in hospitals across the country. 3 universities had offered me research positions. Forbes had called me the most innovative biomedical engineer under 40. But tonight, at his retirement party, I was still just the daughter who'd never had what it takes. I stared at the banquet hall windows, wondering if he'd opened the box yet, wondering if anything inside would finally make him see me, wondering if it even mattered anymore. My phone rang as I sat in the parking lot. Thomas's name flashed on the screen. "Naomi? What the hell was that?" His voice was sharp with embarrassment and confusion. "Dad's sitting here with tears in his eyes and everyone's asking questions. What did you put in that box?" "The truth," I said simply. "What does that mean?" "Mom's freaking out. James is trying to calm everyone down. And Dad won't tell anyone what's inside. You need to come back and explain yourself." I almost laughed. Even now, even after what I'd just done, Thomas was more concerned about appearances than understanding. "I don't need to do anything, Thomas. I've spent 39 years trying to explain myself to this family. You're being dramatic. Dad loves you. We all do. He just what? Just thinks I'm a failure? Just never bothered to learn what I actually do for a living? Just introduced his retirement party guests to his 2 successful sons and his disappointing daughter?" Silence stretched between us. In the background, I could hear the murmur of the party continuing, though it sounded more subdued now. "He didn't mean it like that," Thomas finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, he did. And you know what? It's fine. I stopped needing his approval a long time ago." Then why the dramatic exit? Why embarrass him at his own party? That was the question I'd been asking myself. Why tonight? Why now? After all these years of swallowing my pride and forcing smiles at family gatherings? Maybe it was because I'd finally realized something. I wasn't angry at Dad for not understanding my success. I was angry at myself for still caring whether he did. "I have to go," I told Thomas. "Naomi, wait." I hung up and started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse through the banquet hall windows of Dad still sitting at the head table, the open box in front of him. Even from a distance, I could see the papers scattered across the white tablecloth, could see him holding one of the frames. Part of me wanted to know what he was thinking. Part of me wanted to go back inside and watch him read every word, see his face as he finally understood who I'd become. But a bigger part of me realized it didn't matter anymore. I'd spent decades seeking validation from a man who saw my greatest achievements as hobbies. I'd built a company that was changing lives, created technology that was saving patients across the country, earned respect from colleagues and competitors alike. I'd done all of that while waiting for my father to notice. Tonight, driving away from his retirement party, I finally stopped waiting. The box contained 3 items, each one carefully chosen to tell a story Dad had never bothered to learn. Whether he understood that story now, whether it changed anything between us, was no longer my concern. For the first time in my life, my father's opinion of me felt irrelevant. 3 days after the retirement party, Mom called. I was in my office at Lumerin Publishing, the medical device company I'd founded, reviewing prototypes for our latest cardiac monitoring system when her name appeared on my phone screen. "Naomi, honey, we need to talk." Her voice sounded tired, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Hi, Mom. How's Dad?" "That's what I'm calling about. He's not himself since the party. He keeps reading those papers you gave him, over and over. He won't eat, barely sleeps. Yesterday I found him in his office at 3 a.m, just staring at that Forbes article. I set down my coffee, suddenly feeling the weight of what I'd done. I didn't mean to upset him. He's proud of you, sweetheart. He always has been. He just doesn't know how to show it. The familiar defense. The same words Mom had used for decades to explain away Dad's indifference. "Mom, he called me a failure in front of 200 people. He didn't mean it that way. You know how your father is with words. He's not good at expressing emotions." I stared out my office window at the bustling research lab below, where my team was developing technology that would help doctors save lives. He expressed himself pretty clearly about Thomas and James. That's different. He understands their work, construction, law. These are things he can relate to. Your field is so complex. He's intimidated by it. Intimidated? The word caught me off guard. "Naomi, your father dropped out of college twice before finally getting his engineering degree. He spent his whole career building bridges and buildings, things you can see and touch. What you do, it's like magic to him. He reads your articles and doesn't understand half the words." I'd never known about Dad dropping out of college. In our family mythology, he was the brilliant engineer who'd always known his path. "He could have asked me to explain," I said quietly. "You know he couldn't. Harold Bennett doesn't ask for explanations. It would mean admitting he doesn't know something." Mom paused, and I could hear Dad's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Naomi, there's something else. Something I need to tell you about that scholarship you set up." My chest tightened. The Harold Bennett Science Scholarship was the most personal thing in that box. A full-ride scholarship to Oregon State University for students pursuing biomedical engineering. I'd endowed it with $500,000, enough to support students for decades. "What about it?" "Your father. He called the university yesterday. He wanted to make sure it was real, that you'd actually done what the certificate said. And they told him you're the largest individual donor they've ever had under 50. Not just for the scholarship. Apparently you've been funding their biomedical research lab for 3 years. Anonymous donations, until now." I closed my eyes. Those donations had been my way of giving back, of supporting the next generation of researchers. I'd kept them anonymous because I hadn't wanted recognition. I'd just wanted to help. "He knows about all of it now," Mom continued. "The lab has your name on it, Naomi. The Harold Bennett Biomedical Research Lab. They've been trying to thank you for years." I hadn't known they'd named the lab after the scholarship. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad's name was on cutting-edge research he'd never understand, funded by the daughter he'd dismissed. "He's asking to see you," Mom said softly. "Will you come over, please?" I looked at my calendar, packed with meetings and deadlines. My company was in the middle of negotiations with 3 major hospital systems. I had a prototype deadline next week that could revolutionize emergency cardiac care. But something in Mom's voice made me pause. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. As I drove across Portland to my childhood home, I wondered what I was walking into. Was this Dad finally ready to acknowledge what I'd built? Or was it another attempt to minimize my accomplishments, to find a way to make them about him? Either way, I was done pretending his opinion mattered. The girl who desperately wanted her father's approval was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned to validate herself. Dad was sitting in his study when I arrived, surrounded by the papers from the box. The Forbes article was spread across his desk, along with printouts that looked like they'd come from my company's website. He looked up when I walked in, and I was startled by how much older he seemed than he had 3 days ago. Naomi. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. Thank you for coming. I sat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd received countless lectures about practical career choices and realistic expectations. Today it felt different. Today, I wasn't the little girl seeking approval. Mom said you wanted to talk. He gestured at the papers scattered around him. I've been doing some reading about your company, about what you've accomplished. Just now? After 5 years? The question hung between us, sharp and unavoidable. Dad's face flushed slightly. I thought I knew. I thought it was a small medical supply business or something. I didn't realize... He picked up the Forbes article, shaking his head. Naomi, you've built something extraordinary. Yes, I have. My directness seemed to surprise him. He was used to me deflecting compliments, minimizing my achievements to make others comfortable. This device you invented, the cardiac monitor. The article says it saved thousands of lives. Tens of thousands, actually. The latest models are being used in emergency rooms across the country. We're expanding to Europe next year. Dad stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. How did you do it? How did you build all this? The question was so genuine, so devoid of his usual dismissiveness, that it caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw not the father who'd disappointed me, but an old man genuinely trying to understand his daughter's life. Hard work. A lot of very smart people who believed in the vision, and about 15 years of your constant skepticism motivating me to prove you wrong. He winced at that last part. Naomi, Let me finish. My voice was calm but firm. I started this company because I saw problems in healthcare that needed solving. Patients were dying because existing monitoring equipment was too expensive, too complex, or too unreliable. I knew I could build something better. I gestured to the Forbes article on his desk. That device has a 98% accuracy rate and costs 1/3 of what similar equipment used to cost. It's not about the money or the recognition. It's about the emergency room doctor in rural Montana who can now diagnose heart attacks in patients who would have died 20 years ago. Dad's eyes were filling with tears. I had no idea. I never bothered to learn. No, you didn't. You dismissed it as a hobby, just like you dismissed everything else I ever cared about. I was wrong. The words came out barely above a whisper. I was so wrong, and I don't know how to fix it. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so used to. But all I saw was genuine remorse, and something that looked like awe. Dad, do you know what I wanted most when I was growing up? He shook his head. I wanted you to ask me about my day. Just once. I wanted you to show up to one of my science fairs, to read one of my school papers, to act like what I was doing mattered to you. It did matter. You mattered. I didn't know how to connect with you. Your brothers were so much like me, and you were so... He searched for the word. Different? Brilliant. You were brilliant in ways I couldn't understand. It intimidated me. The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way our family had never been. There's something else, Dad said, reaching for a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. I've been making some calls since the party, learning about things I should have known years ago. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. Press releases, medical journal articles, university announcements, all featuring my name and work. Did you know you've been nominated for the National Medal of Technology and Innovation? He held up an official-looking document. The White House, Naomi. The President wants to recognize your contributions to American innovation. I had known, actually. The notification had come last month, and I'd been too busy with product launches to think much about it. Awards and recognition had stopped feeling important after years of working for personal satisfaction rather than external validation. And this. He pulled out another paper. You've been invited to present at the World Health Organization's conference on medical device innovation. They're calling your work paradigm shifting. Dad set the papers down and looked at me with something approaching wonder. How did I miss all of this? How did I have a daughter changing the world and not even notice? Because you never looked, I said simply. You decided who I was when I was 8 years old and never bothered to update your assessment. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He paused, seeming to gather courage for something. Naomi, would you explain it to me? Your work? I want to understand. For 39 years, I dreamed of this moment. Dad, finally asking about my passion, wanting to understand what drove me. Now that it was happening, I felt surprisingly detached from it. It's complex. Medical device engineering requires understanding of physiology, electronics, materials science, data analysis. I'm not as smart as you, he interrupted. But I'm not stupid. Try me. I studied his face, seeing genuine curiosity there. Slowly, I began to explain how cardiac monitors work, how I'd identified the flaws in existing technology, how my team had developed solutions that were more accurate and more affordable. Dad listened intently, asking surprisingly thoughtful questions. So the sensors you developed can detect irregularities that older machines miss? He asked. Exactly. And because our device uses machine learning algorithms, it gets better at diagnosis over time. It learns from every patient it monitors. He shook his head in amazement. That's incredible, Naomi. You're saving lives every day. The conversation continued for another hour. Dad asked about my team, my manufacturing process, my plans for expansion. For the first time in my life, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding my world. But something had shifted in me during those 3 days since the party. His attention felt too little, too late. I should go, I said finally. I have a board meeting this afternoon. Wait. Dad stood as I did. Naomi, I know I can't undo 40 years of not seeing you, but I want to try to do better. I want to be the father you deserved. I looked at him. This man who'd shaped so much of my early life through his indifference, and felt something close to pity, not for his ignorance, but for everything he'd missed by choosing not to see me. I appreciate that, Dad, but I'm not the little girl who needed your approval anymore. I've built a life I'm proud of, with or without your understanding. I know you have. That's what makes this so tragic. I missed watching my daughter become extraordinary. I walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you enjoy your retirement. You earned it. As I drove back to the office, I realized something had been resolved, though not in the way I'd expected. I'd finally gotten my father's attention, his respect, even his admiration, and I'd discovered it no longer mattered to me. 2 weeks later, I was in my office when Thomas called. I almost didn't answer. My relationship with my brothers had grown even more strained since the retirement party. But curiosity got the better of me. Naomi, we have a problem, he said without preamble. Dad's been calling everyone we know, telling them about your company, about your achievements. He's like a broken record. That's a problem? He showed up at my law firm yesterday with printed copies of that Forbes article. He cornered 3 of my partners in the break room and spent an hour explaining your cardiac monitoring device. He doesn't even understand what you do, but he's trying to tell everyone about it. I almost smiled. Dad, who'd never shown interest in my work, was now apparently its biggest advocate. He did the same thing at James's office, Thomas continued, and at his golf club. And at Mom's book club. He's driving everyone crazy, Naomi. He's become obsessed. With what? With you. With making sure everyone knows how successful his daughter is. It's like he's trying to make up for 40 years of not bragging about you by doing it all at once. I leaned back in my chair, processing this. Dad, who'd introduced me as still figuring things out for most of my adult life, was now apparently my unofficial publicist. There's more, Thomas said. He wants to throw you a party, a celebration of your achievements. He's already called the country club, started making a guest list. He wants to invite everyone from the retirement party and formally, apologize, introduce you properly. The irony was thick. After a lifetime of being overlooked, Dad wanted to put me center stage. But now that he was finally ready to see me, I'd move beyond needing to be seen by him. Tell him no, I said. What? Tell him I don't want a party. I don't need him to introduce me to people. I don't need his validation or his public apologies. Naomi, he's trying. He's really trying to make things right. I know he is. But that's for him, not for me. I'm not interested in being his redemption story. The next morning, Dad showed up at my office. My assistant tried to stop him, but he'd apparently charmed his way past building security and made it all the way to my floor. We need to talk, he said, standing in my doorway with the same determined expression I'd seen him wear when tackling difficult engineering problems. Dad, I'm in the middle of... I know you don't want the party. Thomas told me, but I need you to understand something. He stepped into my office and closed the door behind him. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you. I don't need you to do anything for me. Yes, you do. His voice was firmer than I'd heard it in weeks. Because I spent 40 years telling people you were just okay. Just average. Just my daughter who hadn't figured things out yet. And now I know the truth. But they don't. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Do you know what this is? I shook my head. It's a list of every person I told that you were wasting your time with science projects. Every colleague I complained to about your impractical career choices. Every family friend I told not to take your work seriously. His voice cracked slightly. It's a long list, Naomi, and I owe it to you to set the record straight with every single person on it. I stared at the paper, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't about his guilt or his need for redemption. This was about repairing damage he'd done to my reputation, to how people saw me. I spent decades undermining you without even realizing it, he continued. Let me spend whatever time I have left building you up. For the first time since the retirement party, I felt my emotional armor crack slightly. Not because I needed his help, but because I finally understood the depth of what he was trying to repair. Okay, I said quietly. But we do this my way. Dad's face lit up with relief and gratitude. However you want it. Looking at him in that moment, I realized that my revenge had been more complete than I'd intended. I'd wanted him to see me, and now he couldn't see anything else. I'd wanted him to understand what he'd missed, and now he was drowning in regret. I'd wanted him to acknowledge my success, and now he was desperate to proclaim it to anyone who would listen. But somehow, his recognition felt less important than the journey I'd taken to earn it. The best revenge, I realized, had been building a life so successful that his opinion of it had become irrelevant. Everything else was just epilogue. As I worked alongside my father to plan an event that would properly introduce me to his world, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn my revenge had taken. From a moment of anger to an opportunity for healing, even if the healing was more for him than for me.